Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard and welcome to the first tournament tactician of the Magical Misadventures set. I will be going over the tier list. Now keep in mind, this is a day 3 tier list for tournaments that more or less haven't really happened yet, so everything's going to be arbitrary. A lot of it's open to interpretation. I'll have a much more solid idea in a couple of weeks, but do keep in mind that we have some time to really stretch our legs here. The seasonal isn't happening until I believe February, at worst late January, and we do know that there is a balance patch coming in January, so a lot of the things that are happening right now are really just kind of going to be figuring out what needs to go in that balance patch, and then from there we'll kind of go on to the seasonal meta. So there's really not a lot of like seasonal implications from something like this, but it is the opening weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, the Online League Series X Mobalytics is running this weekend. $200 prize pool. Myself and JDoz will be casting it as always. Really hope to see you there. It is America's only, unfortunately, but let's get into the tier list. So what we have here is a pretty arbitrary week 1 tier list. Now, I want to go through a lot of these samples to give you sort of the major updates, both on the new decks and what they look like, as well as some of the old decks that have updated with new cards, or some of the old decks that haven't necessarily updated with new cards, but have updated to beat the new meta. Now, soft targeting is going to be available this weekend. I think that when Beyond the Bandlewood came out, the opening weekend for that in the Online League Series, first place was actually a lineup that was made to soft target Draven Scion. So, like, I don't think it's out of the question to come out of the gate saying, hey, I'm just going to beat every Ezreal Kennen player that I run into. Now, I know how to hard target these lineups, which I don't recommend. I don't really know what soft targeting looks like exactly, but, like, if you were on the fence, like, oh, you know, maybe Ezreal Kennen's not going to be popular enough, just go for it. Again, there are no real implications for this weekend in terms of seasonal. The testing that you're doing is not relevant in the long run. It's more of a short run thing. But yeah, I want to go through this with you and show you what some of these new updated lists look like, as well as the new ones, and then sort of have a general overview at the end. Not really going to talk about lineups too much because holy hell, there are a lot of new things to be looking at. I cannot do lineups as well. So let's get into it. So, kicking things off with Yordle Rally. I got this list from Cameron Hanzo, who is currently sitting in Masters on the Americas Shard. First thing I want to throw out there, Teemo. Not necessarily mandatory. Drissoth, I think, went on a rant on Twitter about how he prefers Fizz in this slot for a couple of reasons that I think are really important. Number one being, he has an easier champion level up requirement to meet, meaning he gets bigger faster. Number two, he's got a better champion spell. Teemo's is basically useless. Another Rally on top of that is actually pretty good for everything that this deck wants to be doing. Number three, and maybe the most important, is that Bilgewater is still pretty popular. Make It Rain is a popular card, and you don't have a lot of keg interactions. So if a kegged up Make It Rain is going to destroy your board, then Fizz actually gets a decent amount done there. Now, this is the first of many Yordle Explorer decks that we're going to be looking at. This was probably one of the most feared cards coming out of the spoiler season. Yordle Captain is in here. Just for those of you that were like, I know there were Yordle Captain doubters, and there were people that were really big on Yordle Captain. He is in the current opening weekend list. That's all I'm going to say about that. But there are multiple Poppy decks and multiple Yordle Explorer decks that we're going to be looking at. If you are going for a triple Yordle Explorer lineup, my recommendation would be to keep Poppy in this list, because while it's not the one that necessarily needs Poppy the most, I think that Poppy just gets, like, is the most effective in the list with the rallies. And this is the list with the rallies. We got a few decks to get through. I'm going to try to limit these to about 60 seconds a deck. Now, I'm skipping over Bandle Pirates and Plunder because the builds for those didn't really change. Bandle Pirates especially just got a little bit better because it is looking to smork down things like Kennen Ezreal. When we're talking about Kennen Ezreal, this is the most popular deck. I'm sure everybody knows how it plays at this point. If not, look up a guide. You'll figure it out pretty quickly. There's basically two ways to beat this deck. Either A, you can aggro it down, because if you look at their spell lineup, there's really not a lot of great anti-aggro tools. The recalls and the retreats and stuff are cool for ghost blocking, but that's really all that they're cool for in terms of stopping aggro. And that's a train that's going to run out pretty quickly, especially because you're not actually killing the units that are on board. Now, the other option that people are going for is actually just running your opponent out of Kennens. Now, this is both easy and hard. It's easy because Kennen only has 1 HP. It's hard because if you leave Kennen on the board for a single priority sequence, then God Willow Seedling can come down, and at that point, you can kind of forget running them out of Kennens. It's much more consistent to just smork them down, and anything that is looking to play a long game and doesn't have ways to kill every Kennen is in a pretty rough spot. Taric Pantheon. Now, I'm optimistic for this as us finally having a good deck for Taric and Golden Aegis. I'm actually putting it in tier 1 for the opening weekend. I think that while I'm not in love with this list in particular, which I got from a fight night, I do think that a refined, perfect version of Pantheon Taric will be tier 1, and I'm optimistic for it on the opening weekend. Now, the problem with it is that it doesn't do very well into Kennen. The good news is that it does do well into Yordles, and I think that Yordles are going to be very popular. You might even see Yordles alongside Kennen, because some people just run the most broken decks in the game. And if you're trying to go for the Smork plan, you're going to find out you really want 3 poppies pretty quickly, and you just can't have them. So, I'm optimistic for this. I'm not in love with this particular version, but I'm sure someone will figure out something a little bit different. But this is a really good baseline if you're just looking to play Pantheon Taric, and it's definitely better than Dragons, I would say. An updated list for Bandle City Swain from Salty Simon. Now, I was really big on this deck going into the previous seasonal. It did very well into sort of the Poppy Rally decks, so I imagine it'll still do pretty well into Yordles. And it's also, this build specifically that Salty Simon ran in Europe's Fight Night was streamlined for Kennen. I mean, we've got group shots and poison darts, and we took out the executes, which means we're aiming at 1 health units, which has to be Kennen, and then Culling Strike coming in for the myriad of Poppy decks that are going to be running around and things like that. Just Culling Strike getting a lot better with the Poppy nerf. People more lecturing Yordles are happening and things like that. You also get to kill the Yordle Explorer with it. Ultimately, I'm still pretty big on this list. I'd say high tier 2. Optimistic to see what it does this weekend. We had Yordle Rally, now we have Yordle Burn. I really thought that Bandle Pirates was going to turn into a Yordle Explorer deck, but it didn't. But Ziggs Poppy did. Now, this is where you really have to start to make considerations on, like, is Poppy best in slot for this deck? Maybe you go for Lulu instead because you're Bandle City still, and you play 1-drops. I don't know. You got to figure it out if you're the one that wants to run multiple Yordle decks. But I did want to shout out that this has changed a little bit more into a Yordle Explorer deck. But there really wasn't like a big shift. It's just like this deck typically plays Yordle Explorer now. It's just really what I wanted to highlight here. Scouts, the third Poppy deck we're looking at. So Scouts made a pretty big resurgence, especially in the Americas seasonal, getting both first and second place. But we've gone back to the Stony Suppressor style of gameplay to beat Ezreal Kennen just a little bit harder. Now, I don't necessarily know that you need to be Stony Suppressor Scouts in order to beat Ezreal Kennen. I think you might actually be able to just out-aggro it in a way that Scouts typically does with some of these slower decks. But I don't know. I'm not really a Scouts player. I haven't really played much as Kennen either. So I'm just talking out of my ass on that one. Maybe you don't need the Stony Suppressor, and if you don't need the Stony Suppressor, that'd be nice because in a tournament setting, you're much more likely to run into probably an equal number of like Yordle decks as you are as Kennens. So the Stony Suppressor can start to hurt you a little bit, but it's also going to be good against those Pantheon decks. So there's reasons to run it, there's reasons to not. You really have to look at your perceived meta and say, do I want to be a Stony Suppressor deck or do I not? Now, I know that I said for Yordles, that's where I wanted the Poppy, even though that was the Rally one. This deck obviously also runs Rallies, but I feel like the Poppy is slightly more replaceable in this list than it is in the Yordle deck. That's also coming out of my ass. While I'm not super optimistic for Lee Sin in the opening weekend, it is still an Eye of the Dragon world out there. You can beat other things, especially if you ban the Ezreal Kennen, then that's really only one Kennen deck you have to deal with. You've still got pretty good matchups into the rest of the meta that is left over, and I don't think you're going to be able to out Eye of the Dragon the Yordle decks. I think that they just get a little bit too big for too long. Many of them are running single combat and things like that, but I did want to update you on some changes to the Lee Sin deck, mostly the inclusion of Wounded White Flame. When I went over my video of doing sort of rating all the new cards, I had forgotten that Wounded White Flame could fit into Lee Sin, and I rated it too poorly, and then I mentioned that in the comment section. But anyway, so this is like an updated Lee Sin list. People are trying out Wounded White Flame. I think it's pretty good. I don't really have strong opinions on it just yet. Just wanted to shout this out. And then rounding things out, we have really the only Ahri decks that I could find. This is Ahri Kennen. It's Elusive Aggro with Kinku Wayfinder and the Absolver. Hooray! And then we have Targon, which is a lot more like Ezreal Kennen, except you're Ahri. Those are the Ahri decks. And Rumble is nowhere to be seen, because he can go fuck. And then Bandle Tree's kind of all over the place. Fizz comes out for Grumble Slug. That's really all we know. The champions are kind of up in the air. It doesn't necessarily have to be Poppy, but it is what it is. Anyway, so what we're expecting to see this weekend in terms of lineups, I would guess that like Yordle, Rally, Bandle Pirates, and Ezreal Kennen is going to be a good starting place for a lot of people. And in a lineup like that, you would look to ban the Yordle Rally and then just kind of, you know, pick on the Ezreal Kennen, maybe try to win the mirror match. If you have some kind of specific tech for the mirror match that you're really excited to try out, that would be the place to do it. But there's no like super specific lineup that's calling to me. If you're going for like a triple Smork lineup, you're gonna have to figure out where you are or are not putting your Poppy, because I seriously doubt that you are finding a good lineup where two decks did not want to be running Poppy. Like, you'll have to make a consideration. I can't tell you where to do that. I told you my suggestion, but I can't hard confirm like, hey, this is the way to do it, because I'm not a big Poppy player. So that is what it is. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. You can go ahead and, again, check out the tier list yourself. It is in the link tree in the description below, as it always is, and kind of go from there. The sign-up links for the online League Series will also be down there, as well as any other tournaments that I find that are happening this weekend. So, thank you so much for joining me on the Week 1 journey. Be sure to check back my Twitter on Monday or Tuesday for the competitive wrap-up article that I do for Giant Slayer, and that'll give you a good idea of how everything played out, because, again, I no longer do Tournament War Room videos because those guys got turned into articles, like, 5 months ago at this point. If you haven't read any of them, check them out for sure. It's where I do the wrap up. You definitely want to check out the one the weekend after an expansion drops. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.